The autumn leaves of 1993 were particularly vibrant in Cedar Falls, Oregon, painting the small town in brilliant shades of amber and crimson. It was the kind of October day that made children want to spend every possible moment outdoors, climbing trees and building forts before winter's grip would force them inside. For 8-year-old Tommy Mitchell, October 15th would be his last day of childhood wonder, though no one knew it at the time. Robert Mitchell remembers that morning with painful clarity. Even now, 10 years later, Tommy had bounded down the stairs, his unruly brown hair sticking up at odd angles, clutching his most prized possession, a small wooden music box his grandmother had given him for his 7th birthday. The delicate mechanism played Brahms' Lullaby when wound, and Tommy treasured it more than any toy or game. "Dad, can I take my music box to the Treehouse today?" Tommy had asked, his green eyes bright with excitement. The treehouse, built by Robert the previous summer, stood majestically in the old oak tree at the back of their property. It was Tommy's sanctuary, a place where his imagination could run wild. "Of course, buddy," Robert had replied, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. "Just be careful with it, okay? Grandma Rose would be upset if anything happened to her special gift." Sarah Mitchell, Tommy's mother, had packed him a lunch of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, apple slices, and chocolate chip cookies. She kissed his forehead and reminded him to be back before dark. Tommy promised, as he always did, and skipped out the back door, music box in hand, lunch bag swinging from his shoulder. That was the last time they saw their son. When Tommy didn't return for dinner, Robert and Sarah initially assumed he had lost track of time, as children often do. But when Robert climbed up to the treehouse to fetch him, he found only Tommy's empty lunch bag and a single apple slice, barely touched. The music box was nowhere to be found. The search began immediately. Neighbors joined the effort, flashlights cutting through the growing darkness as voices called Tommy's name into the night. The local police arrived within hours, followed by search and rescue teams. For weeks, every inch of the surrounding forest was combed. Helicopters circled overhead. Search dogs followed scent trails that led nowhere, and volunteers distributed flyers with Tommy's smiling face throughout the Pacific Northwest. But Tommy Mitchell had simply vanished, as if he had never existed at all. The investigation revealed no signs of struggle, no indication of foul play. The ladder to the treehouse remained in place, undisturbed. Tommy's bicycle sat exactly where he had left it, propped against the oak tree's massive trunk. It was as though he had simply stepped out of reality itself. Detective Maria Santos, who led the investigation, interviewed everyone in town. She was a methodical woman in her early 40s, with graying hair and compassionate eyes that had seen too much tragedy in her 15-year career. Maria had 2 children of her own, and Tommy's case affected her deeply. The investigation consumed her life for months. She explored every possibility with exhaustive thoroughness. The kidnapping theory led to extensive background checks on every adult who had contact with children in Cedar Falls. Teachers, coaches, maintenance workers, even the elderly man who ran the corner store where Tommy sometimes bought candy. Every single person was cleared. The runaway theory seemed equally unlikely. Tommy was only 8 years old, had no history of wandering off, and had never expressed any desire to leave home. His piggy bank remained untouched, containing the $12.37 he had been saving for a new baseball glove. His beloved stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, sat on his bed exactly where he had left it that morning. The creek that ran through the woods was dragged repeatedly. Divers searched every deep pool and hidden eddy, but the water was shallow that autumn, the summer drought having reduced it to barely more than a trickle in most places. There was simply nowhere for a child to disappear into those gentle waters. The forest search was the most extensive. Teams of volunteers worked in grid patterns, calling Tommy's name until their voices were hoarse. Search dogs followed his scent to various points in the woods, but the trails always ended abruptly, as if Tommy had simply vanished into thin air. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras scanned the dense canopy, looking for any sign of a small body, living or deceased. Maria personally interviewed every registered individual in the state who had been convicted of crimes against children. She traveled hundreds of miles, sitting across from dangerous men in prison cells and halfway houses, searching their eyes for any flicker of recognition when she showed them Tommy's photograph. Each interview led nowhere. The FBI was called in after the first week, bringing their own team of specialists and behavioral analysts. They created detailed profiles of potential suspects, analyzed the crime scene with sophisticated equipment, and coordinated with agencies across the country to check for similar disappearances. Agent David Kruger, a man who had worked kidnapping cases for over 20 years, confided to Maria that he had never encountered anything quite like Tommy's disappearance. "It's like the boy just ceased to exist," Kruger said during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "No witnesses, no physical evidence, no indication of struggle or coercion. In my experience, children don't simply vanish without leaving some kind of trail." The psychological evaluation of the family revealed no red flags. Robert and Sarah Mitchell were devoted parents with no history of abuse or neglect. Their marriage was solid, their finances stable, their reputations in the community beyond reproach. Tommy himself was described by everyone as a happy, well-adjusted child who loved school, had plenty of friends, and showed no signs of psychological distress. As weeks turned to months, Maria found herself returning to the Mitchell property again and again, always with Robert's permission. Something about the case nagged at her, a feeling that she was missing some crucial piece of the puzzle. She would stand at the base of the oak tree, looking up at the treehouse, trying to understand how a child could disappear from such an ordinary place in such an ordinary way. The media attention brought its own complications. Well-meaning psychics called the police department daily, claiming to have visions of Tommy's location. Each tip had to be investigated, no matter how far-fetched. Maria personally drove to a quarry 30 miles away because a woman claimed she had seen Tommy in a dream, standing beside dark water. She searched an abandoned farmhouse because another psychic insisted the boy was being held there by a man with a red beard. Every lead proved false, but Maria couldn't afford to dismiss any possibility. The media attention was intense, but brief. For a few weeks, Tommy's disappearance made national news. Television crews set up camp in Cedar Falls. Reporters knocked on doors, and talk show hosts speculated about what might have happened to the little boy who vanished from his treehouse. But as weeks turned to months with no new developments, the story faded from public consciousness, leaving only the Mitchell family to carry the weight of their unbearable loss. Sarah couldn't handle the uncertainty. The not knowing ate at her like a disease, consuming her from the inside out. In the first weeks after Tommy's disappearance, she barely slept, spending her nights walking through the house, checking and rechecking every room as if her son might materialize in some overlooked corner. She would stand in his doorway for hours, memorizing every detail of his space. The model airplanes hanging from the ceiling, the stack of comic books beside his bed, the chalk drawings he had made on the small blackboard mounted on his wall. The false sightings began almost immediately. She began seeing Tommy everywhere, in crowds at the grocery store, playing in other people's yards, walking hand in hand with strangers. Each time her heart would race with desperate hope, only to crash when she got closer and realized her mistake. The psychological toll was devastating. She would chase children through shopping malls calling Tommy's name, only to have security guards gently escort her away when the confused child turned around to reveal an unfamiliar face. Robert watched helplessly as his wife disintegrated before his eyes. Sarah, who had always been the stronger one in their relationship, the optimist who found silver linings in every cloud, became a ghost, haunting their own home. She stopped eating regularly, lost 15 pounds in a month, and developed a tremor in her hands that never seemed to go away. The breaking point came on Christmas morning. Sarah had insisted on buying presents for Tommy, wrapping them carefully and placing them under the tree. She had convinced herself that he would somehow return by Christmas morning, that the nightmare would end, and their family would be whole again. When Christmas dawn broke and Tommy's presents remained unopened beneath the tree, Sarah collapsed completely. Robert found her sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by torn wrapping paper, sobbing as she held one of Tommy's new toys, a remote control helicopter they had planned to fly together in the backyard. She kept repeating, over and over, "He's supposed to be here. He's supposed to be here." The doctor who came to the house that day was kind, but frank. Sarah was experiencing what he called complicated grief, a condition where the normal mourning process becomes stuck in a cycle of disbelief and desperate searching. Without professional help and a change of environment, he warned, she might never recover. By Christmas of 1993, Sarah had been admitted to a private facility specializing in trauma recovery. The doctors diplomatically called it a nervous breakdown, but Robert knew it was more than that. It was a woman's mind protecting itself from an unbearable reality by simply refusing to accept that reality existed. When Sarah was released 6 weeks later, she announced that she couldn't stay in Cedar Falls anymore. Every corner of the town held memories of Tommy. Every child's laugh on the playground was a dagger to her heart. Every school bus that passed their house was a reminder of the morning routine they would never share again. "I can't breathe here, Robert," she told him through tears the night before she left for California. "I know you think I'm abandoning you, abandoning him, but I can't. I can't be the woman who sits by the window waiting for a ghost to come home." Her departure felt like a second death to Robert. First he had lost his son, and now he was losing his wife. But he also understood, in the deepest part of his heart, that Sarah needed to save herself. She couldn't save Tommy, couldn't save their marriage, but maybe she could save her own sanity by starting over somewhere else. The divorce papers came 8 months later. Sarah couldn't bring herself to return to Oregon to sign them in person, so everything was handled through lawyers and postal mail. The legal dissolution of their marriage felt like a footnote to the real tragedy that had already torn their family apart. Robert stayed. Someone had to be there, he reasoned, in case Tommy came home. Someone had to keep the porch light on, keep the front door unlocked, keep hope alive even when hope felt like a cruel joke. He maintained the treehouse exactly as they had found it that terrible night, replacing rotted boards when necessary but otherwise leaving it untouched. It became his own shrine, a place where he could sit and remember his son's laughter echoing through the branches. The years passed with agonizing slowness. Robert threw himself into his work as a high school history teacher, finding solace in routine and the distraction of other people's children. But every October 15th, he took the day off and sat in the treehouse, wondering what had happened to his little boy. He aged decades in those 10 years. His brown hair, once the same shade as Tommy's, turned completely gray. Deep lines etched themselves around his eyes and mouth, mapping the geography of his grief. Friends and family encouraged him to move on, to start dating again, to consider the possibility that Tommy was gone forever. But Robert couldn't accept that his son was lost to him, not without proof, not without answers. On October 15, 2003, exactly 10 years after Tommy's disappearance, Robert made a decision that would change everything. He had been avoiding the attic for years, unable to face the boxes of Tommy's belongings that Sarah had packed away before her departure. But on this anniversary, something compelled him to climb those dusty stairs and confront the physical remnants of his son's short life. The attic was thick with dust and memories. Boxes labeled in Sarah's careful handwriting contained Tommy's clothes, his books, his collection of baseball cards, and dozens of toys that had once brought joy to their home. Robert moved through these artifacts of childhood with reverent care, each item a punch to his already battered heart. It was in the last box tucked beneath a stack of picture books that he found it. The music box. Tommy's beloved music box, the one that had vanished with him that October day. But this couldn't be the same one, Robert told himself. Tommy had taken his music box to the treehouse. This must be a different one, perhaps a duplicate that had been overlooked. But as Robert lifted the small wooden box, he recognized every scratch, every tiny imperfection in the carved surface. This was definitely Tommy's music box, the one Grandma Rose had given him, the one he had carried with him everywhere. But how was it here, hidden in the attic, when it should have disappeared with Tommy? Robert's hands trembled as he examined the delicate mechanism. The winding key was bent, and when he tried to turn it, nothing happened. The music box was broken, its sweet melody silenced just as surely as Tommy's laughter had been silenced 10 years ago. But Robert had always been good with his hands. As a child, he had helped his own father repair clocks and watches, learning the patient art of fixing broken things. If this music box could be restored, if Brahms' lullaby could play once more, perhaps it would bring him some small measure of peace. He carried the music box downstairs to his workshop in the basement, a space he had barely used since Tommy's disappearance. The familiar tools felt foreign in his hands at first, but muscle memory gradually returned. He worked with meticulous care, disassembling the delicate mechanism, cleaning each tiny gear and spring, straightening the bent key with infinite patience. Hours passed unnoticed. Robert lost himself in the meditative process of restoration, finding a kind of peace he hadn't experienced in years. As evening shadows began to lengthen across the workshop floor, he finally reassembled the last component and wound the key with bated breath. The first notes of Brahms's lullaby filled the quiet basement, pure and sweet and heartbreakingly familiar. Robert closed his eyes and remembered Tommy winding the music box every night before bed, the gentle melody accompanying his prayers and dreams. For a moment, the intervening years fell away, and it was as though his son was there beside him, green eyes bright with wonder, But then, something strange happened. As the melody played, Robert began to hear another sound underneath it, a faint whisper, so soft he might have imagined it. He held his breath and listened more carefully. There it was again, barely audible but definitely present, a child's voice, calling his name. Dad? The word was so quiet it might have been the wind, but Robert's heart began to race. He carried the music box upstairs, following the sound. The whisper seemed to be coming from outside, from the direction of the backyard, from the direction of the treehouse. Robert stepped onto the back porch, the music box still playing in his hands. The October evening was crisp and clear, with the same golden quality of light that had illuminated that terrible day 10 years ago. And there, standing at the base of the old oak tree, was a figure that made Robert's breath catch in his throat. A boy stood in the gathering dusk, translucent and shimmering like heat waves rising from summer pavement. He was small, perhaps 8 years old, with unruly brown hair and green eyes that sparkled with familiar mischief. He was wearing the same clothes Tommy had worn on the day he disappeared, jeans with grass stains on the knees, a striped shirt, and sneakers with untied laces. "Tommy?" Robert whispered, his voice breaking on his son's name. The boy smiled, the same crooked grin that had melted Robert's heart 1,000 times before. He raised his hand in a small wave, then turned and began climbing the ladder to the treehouse. Each rung seemed to make him more solid, more real, until by the time he reached the platform, he looked exactly as he had 10 years ago. Robert ran across the yard, his heart pounding with a mixture of joy and terror. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of breakdown, some manifestation of his grief-addled mind. But as he climbed the ladder, he could smell the familiar scent of his son, bubblegum shampoo and playground dirt, and that indefinable essence that was uniquely Tommy. "I've been waiting for you, Dad," Tommy said softly when Robert reached the treehouse platform. His voice had the same slight lisp he'd had before losing his front teeth, the same inflection that had narrated countless adventures and dreams. "Tommy, where have you been?" Robert asked, tears streaming down his face. "We looked everywhere for you, we never stopped looking." "I know," Tommy replied, his expression suddenly serious beyond his years. "I tried to come back, but I couldn't. The music stopped, you see? When the music stopped, I couldn't find my way home." Robert looked down at the music box in his hands. The melody had finished playing, but the mechanism was still wound. He turned the key again and Brahms's lullaby began its gentle refrain once more. As the notes drifted through the evening air, Tommy smiled and became more solid, more present. "That's better," he said, settling into his favorite corner of the treehouse, the spot where he used to read his comic books and plan his grand adventures. "I missed you, Dad. I missed Mom, too. Is she okay?" Robert struggled to find words. How could he explain 10 years of heartbreak to a child who hadn't aged a day? How could he make sense of something that defied all logic and reason? She's living with Aunt Linda now," Robert said carefully. "She was very sad when you didn't come home." "We both were." Tommy nodded solemnly. "I know. I could feel it sometimes when the wind was just right. Your sadness followed me wherever I was." "Where were you, Tommy? Where have you been all this time?" The boy looked out through the treehouse window, toward the forest that stretched beyond their property line. "I'm not sure how to explain it," he said slowly. "It's like, remember when we used to play hide and seek, and sometimes you'd find the perfect hiding spot where you could see everyone but they couldn't see you?" Robert nodded, remembering countless games of hide and seek in this very yard. "It was like that," Tommy continued. "I was right here the whole time, but I was hidden in a place between places. I could see you, but you couldn't see me. I watched you come to the treehouse every year on my birthday. I tried to talk to you, but without the music you couldn't hear me. But how did you get there? What happened that day?" Tommy's expression grew thoughtful. "I was playing with my music box like always. But then something strange happened. The melody started playing backwards and everything around me became different. The colors got brighter, the air got thicker, and when I tried to climb down from the treehouse, I couldn't. It was like the ladder was there, but not there at the same time." Robert listened with growing amazement and confusion. Nothing Tommy was saying made sense from a rational perspective, but somehow in this moment, with his son sitting beside him after 10 years of absence, rational thought seemed irrelevant. "I wasn't alone there," Tommy continued. "There were others. Children who had gotten lost in different ways at different times. They taught me how to navigate that in-between place, how to find pockets of warmth and light when things got scary. but none of us could go home until someone fixed what was broken. Tommy's expression grew thoughtful as he remembered his companions in that strange realm between worlds. There was Lucy, who fell through the ice on a frozen pond in Minnesota back in 1987. She had been ice skating with her older brother when the ice cracked, and she slipped into that place instead of the cold water. And Marcus, who wandered away from a family picnic in Georgia in 1995 when he was chasing fireflies at dusk. He followed them right out of this world and into ours. Robert listened with growing fascination as Tommy described the others. There was Elena, a little girl from New Mexico, who had disappeared during a dust storm in 1991, swept away not by wind, but by some invisible current that carried her between dimensions. And James, who had vanished from his bedroom in Maine during a thunderstorm in 1989, pulled through his window, not by lightning but by forces that had no name in the language of the living. We formed a kind of family, Tommy explained. The older kids took care of the younger ones. Lucy taught us how to find food. There were fruit trees there that grew impossible things, apples that tasted like birthday cake, oranges that glowed with their own light. Marcus showed us how to build shelters from materials that looked like clouds but felt solid as wood. The place Tommy described sounded both beautiful and terrifying. It was a landscape of contradictions, where the laws of physics bent and twisted according to rules that made sense only to children's minds. Days and nights happened according to emotion, rather than rotation of planets. When the children were happy, the sky blazed with colors that had no names. When they were sad or frightened, storms would rage with rain that felt like tears. But it wasn't home, Tommy said softly. We all knew we didn't belong there permanently. It was like, imagine if you were visiting the most amazing place in the world, but you knew your family was waiting for you somewhere else. No matter how wonderful it was, you'd still want to go back to the people who loved you. The children had tried various methods to return to their own world. They had called out to their families during what they believed were the equivalent of night hours. Their voices carried on winds that should have reached across dimensional barriers. They had gathered around pools of water that sometimes showed glimpses of the world they had left behind, watching their parents search for them, witnessing the grief and desperation that their disappearances had caused. That was the hardest part, Tommy admitted. Watching you and Mom suffer, knowing we were right there but unable to reach you. I tried so many times to touch your shoulder when you came to the treehouse, to whisper in your ear that I was okay, but my hands passed right through you, and my voice was just wind. The breakthrough came when Tommy discovered that certain objects could serve as bridges between the worlds. Items that had been imbued with strong emotional connections, that had been touched by love and memory so frequently that they became saturated with the essence of home. His music box was one such object, made even more powerful by generations of family love and the special craftsmanship of his great-great-grandfather. Grandma Rose's great-grandfather wasn't just a tinker, Tommy revealed. He was what some people might call a guardian, someone who understood that the boundaries between worlds are thinner than most people realize. He made objects that could serve as anchors, keeping lost souls tethered to the places where they belonged. Other children in that strange realm had similar anchors. Lucy's ice skates, which her grandmother had given her, and which held decades of skating memories. Marcus's jar of fireflies, a mason jar that had been his great-grandfather's and had captured the wonder of countless summer evenings. Elena's turquoise bracelet, a family heirloom passed down through generations of strong women. The music box, Robert said, understanding beginning to dawn. The music box, Tommy confirmed. Grandma Rose told me once that it was special, that it had been in our family for generations. She said it was made by her great-grandfather, who was what people used to call a tinker, someone who could fix anything, who understood the secret workings of mechanical things. Robert remembered his grandmother mentioning the music box's history, stories he had dismissed as family folklore. Rose had claimed that her great-grandfather had been more than just a talented craftsman, that he had somehow imbued certain objects with protective properties, creating anchors that could help lost souls find their way home. But if the music box is what trapped you, Robert asked, then why would fixing it bring you back? Tommy smiled, and for a moment he looked older than his 8 years, as if his time in that other place had given him wisdom beyond his age. Because it wasn't the music box that trapped me, Dad. It was the broken connection. When the music stopped playing that day, I lost my link to this world. Fixing the music box didn't trap me. It freed me. As if to emphasize his point, the melody began to slow and wind down. As it did, Tommy became translucent again, his form wavering like a mirage. Robert quickly wound the key, and his son solidified once more. "I can't stay long," Tommy said gently. "This isn't how things are supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be 8 years old forever, and you're not supposed to be frozen in grief for 10 years. But I don't want to lose you again," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've missed so much. I've missed watching you grow up, teaching you to drive, helping you with homework, all the things fathers are supposed to do. You haven't lost me, Dad," Tommy said firmly. "I'm part of you now. In here." He placed his small hand over Robert's heart. "All those memories we made in 8 years, they're still real. They still matter. And someday, when it's your time, we'll be together again. But right now, you have to let me go." The music box wound down again, and this time Robert didn't immediately wind it back up. He knew Tommy was right. Holding on to this ghostly echo of his son wasn't healing. It was just another form of the grief that had consumed him for 10 years. "What about the other children?" Robert asked. "The ones you mentioned who were lost like you?" "They're going home too," Tommy said, his voice growing fainter as the music slowed. "Fixing my music box created a ripple effect. Other broken connections are being restored. Other families will finally have peace. Will I see you again?" Tommy's form was barely visible now, but his smile was radiant. "Every time you hear Brahms' lullaby, every time you see a little boy climbing a tree, every time you remember that love doesn't end just because someone goes away." The last note of the melody faded into silence. Tommy's image lingered for just a moment longer, his hand raised in a final wave, his lips forming the words, "I love you, Dad." And then he was gone, leaving only the scent of autumn leaves and the echo of laughter that might have been the wind. Robert sat in the treehouse for a long time after that, holding the silent music box and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. For the first time in 10 years, the crushing weight of grief had lifted from his shoulders. He still missed his son. He would always miss Tommy. But the desperate, clawing need to know what had happened, the guilt and self-recrimination that had poisoned every moment of the past decade, had finally been laid to rest. The next morning, Robert did something he hadn't done in years. He called Sarah in California. Her voice, when she answered, was cautious and guarded. They had spoken infrequently since her departure, their conversations stilted and painful, laden with all the things they couldn't say to each other. "Sarah," he said, "I need to tell you something. About Tommy." He heard her sharp intake of breath, the sound of someone bracing for more heartbreak. Did someone find—" "No," Robert said quickly. "Nothing like that. But I think we can finally let go." He told her about the music box, about the strange and wonderful encounter in the treehouse. He expected her to think he was having a breakdown, expected her to suggest therapy or medication. Instead, after a long silence, she began to cry. "I had a dream last night," she said through her tears. "The first good dream I've had about Tommy in 10 years. He was older, maybe 17 or 18, and he was graduating from high school. He looked just like you did at that age, and he walked across the stage and said, 'This is for you, Mom. All the dreams you dreamed for me.'" She paused, struggling for composure. "Do you think it was really him?" "I think," Robert said carefully, "that love finds a way to reach us, even across impossible distances." That phone call was the beginning of something Robert hadn't dared hope for, a slow reconciliation with the woman he had never stopped loving. Sarah didn't move back to Oregon immediately. The healing process was too fragile for such dramatic gestures, but they began talking regularly, sharing memories of Tommy that brought joy instead of only pain. Sarah had spent the past decade building a new life in California. She worked as a children's librarian, finding peace in helping young minds discover the magic of stories. She had undergone years of therapy, learning to live with her loss without being consumed by it. She had even, tentatively, begun dating a kind man named David, who understood that her heart would always have a room reserved for the son she had lost. Robert flew to California for Thanksgiving that year, the first time he had left Oregon since Tommy's disappearance. It was awkward at first. Two people who had shared everything but now felt like strangers, navigating the careful choreography of rebuilding trust. But as they walked on the beach near Sarah's apartment, talking about everything except the enormous loss that had driven them apart, Robert began to see glimpses of the woman he had fallen in love with 20 years earlier. "I never stopped loving you," Sarah told him on his last night there. "But I couldn't love you and stay whole at the same time. The grief was too much for both of us to carry together." "I know," Robert replied. I was so focused on keeping Tommy's memory alive that I forgot to keep our marriage alive. They didn't rush into anything. Sarah needed more time and Robert had his own healing to do. But they agreed to work toward something. Not necessarily the marriage they had lost, but perhaps a friendship that could honor both their shared past and their separate journeys forward. Back in Oregon, Robert threw himself into helping other families facing similar tragedies. Detective Maria Santos, now retired, introduced him to a support group for parents of missing children. Robert discovered that he had something valuable to offer, not just sympathy, but genuine understanding of the particular hell these families endured. He began volunteering with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, offering support to families in the first crucial hours after a child's disappearance. His calm presence and hard-won wisdom helped other parents navigate the bureaucracy of law enforcement and the media circus that inevitably followed. One case particularly touched his heart. 8-year-old Maria Gonzalez had vanished from a playground in Portland, and her parents were experiencing the same desperate spiral of hope and despair that Robert remembered so well. He spent hours with Maria's father, Jose, teaching him the importance of self-care during the search, helping him understand that falling apart wouldn't bring his daughter home any faster. When Maria was found safe 3 days later, she had gotten lost in the woods and had been sheltering in an abandoned cabin. Jose hugged Robert with tears in his eyes. "You gave me hope when I thought I had lost everything," he said. "You showed me that even if the worst happened, I could survive it." These experiences taught Robert that Tommy's disappearance, while devastating, had also given him a unique gift, the ability to help other families navigate their darkest hours. He couldn't bring his son back, but he could use his pain to ease the suffering of others. Robert also began working with Maria Santos on cold cases, applying his intimate knowledge of what families needed to older disappearances that had never been solved. They reviewed files, contacted families who had been waiting for decades for answers, and sometimes, just sometimes, they were able to provide closure or new leads that helped solve cases that had been gathering dust for years. The work was emotionally draining but deeply fulfilling. Robert found that helping other people heal helped him heal as well. Each family he assisted, each case he helped solve, each parent he comforted during their worst nightmare, added another layer of meaning to his own loss. The Treehouse became a regular destination not just for Robert, but for other parents dealing with loss. Word spread quietly through the support group network about the man in Cedar Falls who had found peace after losing his son. Parents would drive from hundreds of miles away to sit with Robert in that simple wooden structure, sharing their stories and finding comfort in his patient presence. One autumn afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after his encounter with Tommy, Robert was hosting a grieving mother named Patricia, whose teenage son had been killed in a car accident. As they sat in the treehouse talking about the importance of carrying love forward rather than carrying grief backward, Robert noticed something that made his heart skip. A child's laughter, faint but unmistakable, drifted through the trees. Patricia heard it too, looking around with a puzzled expression. "Do you have neighbors with children?" she asked. Robert smiled, understanding that some gifts are meant to be shared. "Something like that," he said gently. "I think it's just a reminder that joy doesn't end when someone we love goes away. It just changes form." The music box sits on Robert's mantle now, a place of honor in his living room. He winds it occasionally, listening to Brahms' lullaby fill the house with its gentle melody. But he no longer needs to hear it every day. He no longer needs the desperate ritual of keeping Tommy's memory alive through obsessive preservation of the past. Instead, Robert has learned to carry his son's memory differently, not as a burden of grief but as a treasure of joy. He volunteers at the local children's hospital, reading stories to young patients and helping them build models and puzzles during their treatment. He mentors troubled teenagers at the high school where he teaches, offering the kind of patient, unconditional support he would have given Tommy as he navigated the challenges of growing up. And every October 15th, Robert climbs up to the treehouse. But instead of sitting there consumed by sorrow and questions, he brings a book of poetry or a crossword puzzle. He tells Tommy about his day, about the funny things his students said, about the changing seasons and the small joys of daily life. The treehouse has become a place of connection rather than isolation, a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of memory. Sometimes, when the wind is just right and the leaves rustle in the old oak tree, Robert swears he can hear the faint echo of childish laughter. And sometimes, on very special days, he catches a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision, A flash of striped shirt, a tousle of brown hair, the suggestion of green eyes bright with eternal mischief. But he no longer needs proof. He no longer needs confirmation that love transcends death, that the bonds between parent and child are stronger than the mysteries that sometimes tear families apart. He knows with the quiet certainty that comes only from experience that some connections are unbreakable, some loves are eternal, and some music plays on forever, even when we can no longer hear the melody. The boy who vanished from his treehouse in 1993 had finally come home, not in the way Robert had originally hoped, not in the way that would allow them to create new memories together in this world, but in the way that mattered most, by showing his father that love never truly disappears. It only changes form, becoming something more enduring than physical presence, more lasting than the brief span of years were given together. And in learning to let go, Robert discovered something he had lost along with his son 10 years ago, the ability to hope, to dream, to believe that even in a world where terrible things happen to innocent children, there is still magic to be found, still connections to be cherished, still music playing somewhere in the distance for those who know how to listen. The music box continues to play its lullaby, a bridge between worlds, a reminder that some things are too precious to ever truly be lost. And somewhere, in that place between places where lost children learn to find their way home, Tommy Mitchell smiles and knows that his father finally understands. The music never really stops playing. Sometimes you just need to remember how to hear it.